Hi everybody, this is Saad for the Saad Truth. Some of you might remember the story that I've shared in several venues wherein I was chatting with a cultural anthropology student who happened to also be a feminist and postmodernist. And I was asking her whether human universals exist or not. Uh, and she was of the opinion that no such universals exist. And then to remind those of you who've never heard the story before, I then asked her whether it was true that it is a human universal that only uh, women within Homo sapiens can bear children, to which she scoffed at my ridiculous sexism because she cited some Buga Buga tribe off some Japanese island, whereby in the spiritual realm it was the men who bore children, and therefore by restricting the conversation to this materialistic biological realm, I was being the sexist pig that I am. And so, of course, this is, if you like, quite prophetic. This is a story that happened maybe 13, 14, 15 years ago. I think it was maybe 2002. And it's a story that I've often shared because it demonstrates what happens when you mix a bunch of quackery such as postmodernism and related uh, uh, movements that reject reality, that are anti-science, that are anti-reason. You end up with a whole bunch of quackery. This is true of deconstructionism as well. If some of you remember the rest of the story, she rejected the idea that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, because I was using apparently arbitrary labels like east and west, and the fact that I was calling that star the sun, she calls it dancing hyena, and therefore how could we have a meaningful conversation since these are just arbitrary labels? Now, why am I mentioning this story is because really all of these quote intellectual movements have led to some of the lunacy that you see today. This is stuff that I've been talking about for close to 2 decades. Social constructivism and cultural relativism and postmodernism and radical feminism and identity politics. Put all of these things together and you end up with all of the quackery that you see today, such as, there is no such thing as male and female, and it is wrong to think in a antiquated binary way to assume that there are, human males and human females. Actually, humans come in a much broader variety and so on. And so before I actually address that particular point, I wanted to read to you a couple of passages from The Consuming Instinct, my 2011 trade book, that speaks to some of this lunacy. And then I will use those passages as a linchpin to some of the current realities that we're seeing. So here we go. This is from page 21 of The Consuming Instinct. A common theme throughout a better part of various strands of feminism is that gender is a social construction. Hence, short of an individual's genitalia, most sex-specific phenomena are thought to be due to the differential socialization of the two sexes. Writer and utopian feminist Charlotte Perkins Gilman famously wrote, quote, "There is no female mind. The brain is not an organ. As well speak of a female liver," close quote. Just a breathtakingly idiotic statement. Some feminists have maintained that even sex-specific hormones are nothing more than a social construction. The infamous John Money, the Johns Hopkins University professor who advised surgeons to surgically reassign male infants due to, say, a botched circumcision or if born with a micropenis, did so under the tenet that one's gender was strictly learned. Hence, to the extent that a child who was born male was shortly thereafter raised as a girl with all of the expected sex-specific norms of socialization, Money believed that no deleterious consequences would occur. This utterly outlandish premise has had devastating effects on unsuspecting patients, as per the eventual suicide of David Reimer, who had been raised a girl after his penis had been damaged during a fumbled circumcision. Credit goes to Milton Diamond, a professor at the University of Hawaii, who brought the case to the public eye as a means of highlighting the disastrous consequences of quack theories of human nature. So in this particular paragraph, I'm, critiquing this idea that sex, gender, short of one's genitalia, is all due to social construction. Now, of course, socialization is important when it comes to understanding developmental processes of little boys and little girls. But these socialization processes don't exist outside of biology. They typically exist in their forms because of biology. But in any case, to argue that all sex differences are due to social construction short of one's genitalia is about as intelligent as to argue that the earth is flat. The average 2-year-old, that's literally true, knows that that's a false statement. But now let's go on with some more quackery when it comes to an understanding of human nature. So let's go to the next paragraph. Some theorists propose that heterosexuality is an imposed norm. In other words, it is argued that heterosexuality should not be construed as an innate orientation. Interestingly, when it comes to a homosexual orientation, many gay lobbyists posit that they were born with their same-sex preference. Hence, by amalgamating these two premises, one ends up with the, quote, facts that heterosexuality is not innate, but homosexuality is. This is indeed quite an extraordinary worldview for a sexually reproducing species. So here I was taking on, idiotic positions such as everything is due to social construction, things like heterosexuality is imposed by, heteronormative, patriarchal forces. But of course, homosexuality is innate and is not a choice. Now, of course, the reality is that sexual orientation, whether it be homosexual or heterosexual, is innate. Anybody who can think back of how their sexuality came to be is likely to simply state that at some point they recognized that they were attracted to opposite sex members or same-sex members. But in any case, my point here is that it is quite extraordinary for folks to not recognize the irony that a sexually reproducing species would somehow have heterosexuality be an imposed norm, but homosexuality, which technically speaking is a Darwinian cul-de-sac, is, of course, an innate orientation. You can't make that stuff up. But in any case, let's link it to some of the debates that are going on now in the hallways of lunacy and the abyss of infinite stupidity. Now, the social justice warriors and the social constructivists and their related bedfellows are no longer arguing that sex differences and gender differences are socially constructed. They're rejecting the idea that, there is such a thing as male and female, but rather that's an antiquated binary, biological-based thinking, which, of course, any bien-pensant knows to be completely false. And this is where Jordan Peterson has gotten into all sorts of hot waters because, of course, he's arguing that naturally humans are sexually reproducing species where there is male and female. Now, of course, let me add here that this doesn't mean that intersex individuals don't exist and that transsexuals don't exist and that people with gender identity disorders don't exist. They do. And of course, this does not imply that all of those people, any person, should not live with full dignity and with all of the rights that everybody else has, and that no one should face systemic discrimination. Of course, that's true. But in the pursuit of political activism, what ends up often happening is that people start creating worldviews that are perfectly removed from reality. So, for example, when radical feminists reject the idea that there are biological and evolutionary-based sex differences, they're actually doing it because they think that by conceding that males and females might have innate differences, then this will permit the, quote, sexist status quo to persist. On the other hand, by arguing that no, there are no innate differences between men and women short of their genitalia, then this somehow makes their political activism easier to pursue. So this demonstrates perfectly what happens when ideological positions become infused with the pursuit of science, right? It should be profoundly easy to concede that the, quote, default position of Homo sapiens is that there is such a thing as maleness and femaleness, right? I mean, this should not be a profoundly controversial position. Let me just give you a few analogies that I've used in the past. Priests take a vow of chastity. Some folks are asexual. Other folks are purposely celibate, right? In other words, they give up their sexuality, if you'd like. This doesn't mean that humans are not a sexually reproducing species, despite the fact that the Catholic Church has had 2,000 plus years of individuals who have rejected the pursuit of their sexuality, right? So the fact that priests exist and the fact that homosexuals exist, oh gee, I think that's a wrong word. We're no longer allowed to say homosexual. Now we should say only gays. I think that's the right word. So even though same-sex preferences exist, that doesn't mean that the, quote, default position is not heterosexuality. Okay? And the fact that there are intersex individuals doesn't mean that the two phenotypic expressions of humans is male and female. This is not even biology 101. This is 2-year-old. But again, political activism, in this case, sort of the LGBTQ lobby, is engaged in such strong activism that they start infusing the scientific discourse with all of this nonsense, so that even arguing that biological differences exist across the two sexes, let alone that two sexes exist, become controversial positions. This is dangerous. This is an injury to truth, and it should cease. And all clear-thinking people of good conscience, and certainly academics, should fight back against these positions. Again, not in any way implying that the wide panoply of individuals don't exist. They do. And not implying that all of these people should not have every single opportunity and should be protected in every conceivable way by the law, as you would expect in a liberal, rational society. But let's not confuse ideological positions and political activism with basic scientific truths. Those who reject these realities are really members of the Flat Earth Club Society. There you go, folks. Hope that you found this sad truth clip interesting. If so, please consider sharing it. Talk to you soon. Hope you're having a good week. Ciao.